chapter 8 of part 4 of the contents, a chapter of miracles. Jesus had no politics. Well, I don't know if you can actually say that. Maybe not the derisive way some people mention politics, or the idea of politics as the kingdoms of this world. Certainly that was not his involvement as a citizen, a political follower, a hard saying, its difficulty, its lesson, another lesson, storm on the lake, Jesus stills the storm, Gadara, the demoniac, the swine, in Capernaum, Jairus, the woman with the hemorrhage, is healed in touching Jesus. Well, wasn't the lesson that it wasn't Jesus, but her faith? And we find that faith healing has about as much effect, regardless of what people believe. There are some differences here and there, but, for the most part. Death of Jairus' daughter. Jesus restores the daughter of Jairus to life. 2 blind men restored. Jesus cures a dumb demoniac, and by dumb, of course, I mean unable to speak, or at least speak clearly. In Nazareth, again rejected by his own people. Chapter 9, the third tour of Galilee and return to Capernaum. In Galilee, a missionary movement, address of Jesus, the route of the 12, the home altar, a warning, a consolation, the gospel to be a discrimination, a frightful figure, a great step forward, John the Baptist beheaded, Herod hears of Jesus, return of the 12, miraculous feeding of the 5,000, storm on the lake, Jesus walking on the waters, progressiveness of Jesus, actual progressiveness, not what we mean nowadays, are what might be meant in terms of a reformer, in terms of, they think they have the spirit of the law and change everything else, right? Intense excitement, the bread seekers, they demand a sign. Jesus again offends the Pharisees. Their puzzle, Jesus sifts his followers. Part 5, from the third Passover to the ensuing Feast of Tabernacles, from April to October 29 of the Common Era, 6 months. Chapter 1, Unsettled. Tradition, Jesus rebukes the Pharisees. What defiles a man? In Phoenicia, the Syrio-Phoenician woman, because you're supposed to pronounce the C's as K's always. Jesus appreciates the Holy Wit, the Decapolis, cure of the deaf stammerer, healing, feeding of the 4,000, Daim an Utha, a sign demanded, address to weather prophets, the leaven of the Pharisees, Bethsaida, chapter 2, the Great Confession, Caesarea Philippi, another crisis, not struck root, Peter's solemn confession, Jesus receives messianic homage. But if you look at the way it's phrased, Hosanna, they weren't praying to Jesus by that, so it's not the Messiah in the Christian sense. Address of Jesus to Peter, the word church, his congregation, the power of the keys, Jesus controls history. Okay, we'll have to see what they mean by that. He predicts his resurrection, rebukes Peter, address to his disciples, its meaning, chapter 3, transfiguration, the transfiguration account by the evangelists, why Elijah must first come, sight of the transfiguration, Peter's conjecture, the voice, the influence on the disciples, a perplexity, another perplexity, region of Caesarea Philippi, the demoniac boy, Jesus heals him, chapter 4, last days in Galilee, through northern Galilee, the temple tax, a miracle of knowledge, messianic hopes, the rule of precedents, John's frank confession, schism, if to agree, the idea of a true church, parable of the unmerciful servant, the mission of the 70, inhospitable Samaritan village, part 6, from the Feast of the Tabernacles until the last Passover week, from October of 29 of the Common Era to April of 30 of the Common Era, 6 months, chapter 1, at the Feast of Tabernacles. The Feast of Tabernacles, the evening service, supplemental festival, Jesus at the feast, his defensive speech, he attacks his enemies, asserts his heavenly origin, an alarming speech, the great day of the feast, the fountain of Siloam, they cannot arrest Jesus, in the treasury, the woman taken in adultery, caught in their own trap, conflict of Jesus with his enemies, Jesus more deeply incenses his enemies, Jesus charged with having a demon, his reply, Jesus before Abraham. Chapter 2, the Feast of Dedication. Near Jericho, parable of the Good Samaritan, from Jerusalem to Jericho, Bethany, Mary and Martha, reply of Jesus to Martha, the blind man, existence of evil, the ancient pagan idea, there are no pagan religions or whatever, pagan and heathen is more about housing than anything else. It's like serfdom. Oh, they didn't want to call it paganism, so they called it serfdom. Was that the deal? The Hebrew idea. Who did sin? What Jesus thought of it? Manner of the healing. Healed on the Sabbath. The patient and his parents examined. Jesus meets him. Discourse of the shepherd and the sheep. Division among his enemies. A challenge. Exalted claims. Chapter 3 in Perea. Bethany, east of Jordan. Jesus visits the place of his baptism. The dropsical man. Parable of the Great Supper. Terms of discipleship. Parable of the lost sheep. Of the lost coin. Of the prodigal son. Of the unjust steward. Meaning of the parable. Parable of the rich man and Lazarus. Prayers to saints. Of offenses and forgiveness. A prayer for faith. Sickness and death of Lazarus. Devotion of Thomas. Chapter 4. Jesus on his last circuit. Bethany, near Jerusalem. Jesus claims to be the resurrection. Mary and Jesus. The grief of Jesus. At the grave. Lazarus raised from the dead. The Sanhedrim acknowledge his miracles. Reject him as Messiah. Caiaphas, his prophecy, Ephron, 10 lepers healed, the parousia of the Son of Man, parable of the unjust judge, its lesson, despondency of Jesus, parable of the Pharisees and publican, final departure from Galilee, divorce, Mosaic law of divorce, true law of divorce. Well, don't get married if you ever intend to, get divorced, but, chapter 5, going to Jerusalem, Jesus blesses the little children, the rich ruler, who can be saved, the palingenesia, parable of the laborers, the lesson, the third warning, the ambitious brothers, the blind men, blind Bartimaeus healed, Jericho, Zacchaeus, his conversion, parable of the pounds, Bethany, house of Lazarus, crowds flock to see Jesus, his last Sabbath. And of course, last I heard, there's $1 million reward of anybody that can show from the Bible, except that bit where you're like, where Paul's like, believe and obey anything that your those in charge are saying. Other than that, any mention of the Sabbath being anything except sundown on Friday to sunset on Saturday. Part 7, the last week, from April 2nd to April 8th, 30 of the Common Era, Chapter 1, the first day, Palm Sunday, Jesus riding, great excitement, the church frightened, in sight of Jerusalem, Jesus apostrophizes Jerusalem, entering the city and the temple, Greeks seek him, the bath coal, what was it? Jesus knew it. Chapter 2, the second day, the barren fig tree cursed, trouble in the narrative, a great lesson, a grand truth, the second cleansing of the temple, fine discriminations, an act of mercy. Chapter 3, the third day, by what authority? A counter dilemma, puzzled priests, parable of the two sons, parable of the wicked husbandman, parable of the marriage of the king's son, without the wedding garment, conspiracy, attempt to ensnare Jesus, an adroit question, the net torn, a profound lesson, questioned by the Sadducees, reply of Jesus, Jesus against pantheism, the great commandment. Is it pantheism or panentheism? Well, both at the same time would be condemned, right? The reply of Jesus, David's son and David's Lord, the valedictory to the Jews, contrasted with the Sermon on the Mount. Final woe, last times, the heart of Jesus melts, the widow's mite, last utterance of Jesus in the temple, parable of the 10 virgins, a prophecy, Jerusalem to be destroyed, pseudo-Christs, general judgment to mankind, Jesus the representative of humanity, absence of dogmatism. Dogmatism? I don't know if you could say that that Jesus or any of the prophetic figures ever said, "Oh, never be firm in your beliefs." It was a question of dealing with the conservative mindset, you could say. Not the fundamentalist. The actual fundamentalist is somebody who goes straight to the sources and makes their own conclusions. Their authentically own conclusions. Chapter 4, by that I mean, the liberal would, for their own sake, they'd be loose with the law. either for supposedly their own interest or whatever, rather than what's good and true, right? I don't mean in modern political sense, but chapter 4, the fourth day, disappointed hopes, feast in Simon's house, Mary anoints Jesus, Judas objects, the reply of Jesus, a meeting of conspirators, the capture postponed, Judas comes to them, the case of Judas, fresh examination, chapter 5, the fifth day, the first day of unleavened bread, preparations for the Paschal Supper, at whose house, between the evenings, chapter 6, the sixth day, section 1, section 1, the supper, Jesus' opening speech, washes their feet, Peter's refusal, the lesson, sad prediction, self-inspection, Judas leaves, Peter puzzled, consoling words, Philip's materialism, the deuce perplexed, section 2, the valedictory and last prayer, the Hallel, an outdoor discourse, a pause, disciples express belief, the last prayer with the disciples, section 3, Gethsemane, the Kedron Valley. Is it? I think it's with a Q. In the garden, solitary prayer, a horror, the sweat of blood, the betrayal, Jewish criminal law, prejudgment, irregularities, the signal, the arrest, Peter's zeal, forsaken. Section 4, the trial, fresh outrage, Annas, Caiaphas, reply of Jesus, Peter, his denials, daybreak, false witnesses, Jesus puts on oath, Jesus put on oath, the judge in a rage, intense excitement, section 5, the anger of the judge makes more sense than the Gospel of Barnabas account, because, they grabbed the wrong guy because Jesus isn't too distinct, and, section 5 is Pilate, the procurator, the jus gladit to Pilate, play of passions, a half change of ground in the praetorium, Jesus replies to Pilate, a contrast, Herod, section 6, Herod and Jesus, Herod and Pilate, Jesus sent to Herod, Jesus speechless. Section 7, back to Pilate, Pilate and the Sanhedrin, the people against Jesus, Barnabas, Pilate's wife's dream, the unstable people, Pilate washes his hands, Jesus scourged and mocked, Pilate in trouble, Ecce homo, Pilate seeks to release Jesus, Caesar's friend, a dying nationality, the sentence. The Ecce homo is that part where Pilate's supposed to say that, I don't find any fault in this man. Section 8, the last of Judah. His hopes and fears, the ground gives way. He returns to the priests. They regard him as a fool. He flings the money away. Potter's field. Going to Calvary, bearing the cross, the Catarinian form of the cross, which is this T thing, daughters of Jerusalem, Jesus prophesies, Golgotha, the sour wine. It's not. Now you can say he was hung on a post, or you could say he was hung on a tau cross, but certainly not the lowercase t cross. Sour wine. By sour wine, of course, they mean it was drugged. Section 10, from 9 o'clock till noon. They mean dividing the day into, 6 hours sunrise to sunset, 6 hours sunset to sunrise, and 9 being, half the morning's gone. Jesus prays for his tormentors, the seamless garment, the epigraph, Caesar's verdict, Jesus reviled, the penitent thief, Jesus accepts him, near noon, his mother. Section 11, from noon until 3 o'clock, noon and darkness, the cry, a mystery, the light returns, Jesus thirsts and dies, an earthquake, the centurion. Section 12, from 3 o'clock until evening, a ritualistic difficulty, the thieves killed. Oh, they didn't kill, just plain thieves, although a thief caught at the act. The spear thrust, physical causes of death of Jesus, what was his agony, Joseph and Nicodemus, secret disciples, in a garden, love's last vigil. There's really, 4 in tonic, and in the Christian side, Biblia, 11 mentions of love by and for God. Love is very, not much of a theme in the Bible in actuality. Part 8, resurrection of Jesus and subsequent events, 40 days from April 9th to May 19th, 30 of the Common Era, the Sabbath after crucifixion, the sepulchre guarded, preparations for embalming, a vision in the sepulchre. Well, the preparations could indicate that the person was alive. A message to Peter, John and Peter, Mary of Magdala sees Jesus, her obedience, the other women, the watch, the Sanhedrim, the conspiracy on the way to Ammons. Jesus reveals himself. He appears to Peter, first assembly of the disciples, Jesus in their midst, the Holy Spirit, absolution, Thomas incredulous, the second assemblage, and we have the apostles in Galilee, Jesus by the lake, Peter's ordeal, prediction, John. So section 3, Tabor, 500 brethren at once, Jesus reappears, the commission, the last recorded word, Jesus' concept of God. So obviously Jesus wasn't saying that he was God, worship him. All restrictions removed, a universal religion. There's also a significant rewards out there for people who can illustrate that, except for Paul and his buddies, who said that where did Jesus ever say that he was a God? In fact, Matthew 7:21 to 23, calling him a Lord is just not good enough. But anyways, a universal religion, well, sent to the lost sheep of Israel, but aside from the local terms, a claim and a prediction, the fulfillment, the ascension. The appendices are chronology of the birth of Jesus, Capernaum, addition to note on page 189 and 711 Oh, I don't need to read the page numbers here. Slaves at Jubilee, Mary of Magdala, A Translation Explained, Discipline, The Woman Taken in Adultery, Bethany, Bethabara, translation of Matthew 24:10, Physical Cause of the Death of Jesus. And then there's a description of the illustrations. Oh, at the end. So maybe we'll go back here, but it's important sometimes to know of the geography. We know there are more Bethlehems out there than previously thought. We know there are more Nazareths than previously thought. Yeah, more Nazareths than previously thought.